Yes. And I think philosophically sometimes we put our foot down and we say, but the school district should provide. And that's true. The school district should provide, but that's not always a realistic viewpoint. And so often, when I talk to teachers, money comes up as being, one of the biggest challenges they deal with, and not having money coming in from the district to fulfill all of the needs of the program. And so I do think it's important for educators, music educators, to have some understanding and some knowledge of other places that they might seek out funds.
You are listening to the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we teach music educators how to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. Let's do this thing. Welcome to episode 3 of the Music Ed Mentor podcast. I am your host, Elisa Jones. You can follow my music education blog at professionalmusiceducator.com, and I invite you to join us in the online Facebook group, Music Educators Off the Podium, to connect with other music teachers and find tips and tricks to make your life easier as a music teacher. In this episode, we chat with Wendy Higdon as we share with you 10 top tips for developing an instrument or equipment repair and replacement plan. Whew, that is a mouthful, but I promise we'll be giving you some great advice on how to create a plan that administrators will love to throw money at. You can follow Wendy's blog at onandoffthepodium.com, which I'll share a link with in the show notes. You'll also find a link to the webinar we created, where we walk you step by step through the process of creating your own plan and give you some custom-made templates too that will make the whole process not just painless, but absolutely simple. But first, let me share a little bit about this podcast sponsor, Smart Music. In 2011, NAFME, that's NAFME to most of us, did a series of posts filled with tips to help enhance your students at home and in rehearsal practice. Of the 7 tips, Smart Music can reinforce 5 of them with the ability to coach slow motion, concentrated repetition, variation, singing, and even recording and assessment. Smart Music is the best online tool for our trade. With that in mind, let's jump into our conversation with Wendy. So why don't we get started, Wendy, with you telling me a little bit about your background and how you got interested in, this whole instrument thing that we're going to be talking about today.
Well, I'm a middle school band director in Carmel, Indiana, and I just finished my 26th year of teaching. And I've been a department chair for the last 13 years. And so as a department chair, I really have had to learn how to work the administrative side of things. And I really got involved in the whole instrument repair and replacement planning out of necessity. I opened a new building 13 years ago, so we had everything we needed for a few years. But then as my program started to grow, we needed to add to that inventory. And now that we're 13 years in, some of these instruments are nearing the end of their lifespan. So looking ahead to the future in the next 5 to 10 years, how are we going to start replacing equipment as it moves out of its usable lifespan? So that's what got me started.
So really out of necessity for being awesome and growing your own program. That's fabulous.
Absolutely out of necessity.
So how I found Wendy was I was researching, who in the music education realm talks about the administrative side of things, the business side of things. And of course, your blog, On and Off the Podium, came up, and I just loved your post about this topic, how to create an instrument and inventory repair replacement plan kind of thing. And I thought, man, it'd be great to partner up because I have a strong financial and fundraising background, and you've got the other piece to that, developing the data. So why don't we team up? So if you haven't already discovered our webinar, it's out there in the realm, and you can access it probably from either one of our blogs, and you can check that out. So today we're going to be just talking about 10 top tips for creating your own instrument repair, replacement, or equipment plan. And I love to say equipment too, so we aren't leaving out those choir teachers and elementary teachers who are like, well, I don't have an instrument inventory.
Absolutely. It's all part of your program. It may not be an instrument that a student plays, but it's still important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So let's just jump right in. Number one tip, think like an administrator.
I think that's so important. We tend to really view things from our lens of a music teacher, and one of the things that as I became a department chair, and I actually have my principal's certification as well, I really started to look at things big picture and kind of take the wide view. And if you're going to convince an administrator that you need something or that you need support, if you need financial help, then you have to talk to them on their terms, and you have to talk to them in a way that they can understand, because most of them are not going to have the kind of music background that you do.
So, what are some ways that we can kind of start thinking as an administrator when you say, they're not going to be thinking in the same terms? How is their thinking different?
Well, they have to look at the big picture. They have a lot of responsibilities to juggle, and even just talking about the finances of running a school building or running a school district, they have to weigh the needs of all of the different departments. They have to weigh the needs of infrastructure and all of those kinds of things. And so we have to be able to kind of appeal to their emotional side of things so that they understand why we might need additional instruments, why we might need additional equipment, or a budget for repair, um, along with all of those other things that they have to manage. And, a lot of building administrators, district administrators just don't have that knowledge and background that we do. So we have to educate them. But we have to do that in a way that's respectful of their position and, just understanding of everything that they have to juggle.
Yeah, that's great information. And one of the other ways that, just in my experience talking with other people who have done this same kind of thing, is to not think in score order. And that's something that I didn't even consider, that, we always think alto, soprano, tenor, bass, flute, oboe, clarinet, and they think in alphabetical order. So even just having your inventory list in an order that makes sense for them is a way to kind of tap into their thinking.
Right. Uh, there's not a lot of understanding as to why we do the things we do and the way that we do them. And so, again, we just need to make it as simple and as straightforward anytime we're speaking with an administrator.
Yeah, I like that. So that takes us to tip number 2, which is have lots and lots of data to justify your recommendations.
Well, administrators love data. That's what they live and breathe. And so, again, that kind of goes back to the idea of we need to speak to them in their language. And so, if we can provide data about program growth, increased enrollment, or if we can provide data about the age of certain instruments or the repair history of certain instruments, or how many tubas do we need to create a balanced band instrumentation with a number of students that we have enrolled? Those kinds of pieces of information can help you to gain some understanding from your administrator's point of view. They can start to understand a little bit better if we can provide that solid, hard information for them.
Yeah, and I think better to have a little too much data than not enough, because it would be really unfortunate to go into the situation where you're making a proposal, this is what we need, and they say, well, how have you spent the money so far? Or when was the last time we bought French horns? And you don't have that kind of information. So preemptively thinking about what questions they might have will help you also collect your data.
Exactly, because a lot of administrators don't even know what questions to ask. And so opening those lines of communication and keeping that communication going is going to, in some instances, depend on whether or not you can anticipate those questions that they might have.
Yeah, for sure. Which leads us to number 3, which is using authoritative resources. Be sure you have authoritative resources. That means you're not just pulling things from out of your own head.
Exactly. Um, if you can get information from an instrument manufacturer as to the average lifespan of certain school-owned instruments, that will be an example of an authoritative piece of documentation. If you can point to a text, some kind of a scholarly writing, or one of the many books that are out there that can show this is why we need to have X number of string basses, or whatever the case may be, that's going to help tremendously. And in terms of equipment, Wenger has a great resource guide, especially if you're renovating or building a new building, as to how much square footage you need to have for the size of your program. And so you need to seek out those resources that can help back up what you are trying to ask for.
Yeah, I remember looking up some of those actually when you bring up the Wenger thing about sound, even in your classroom, like what kind of, not sound shells, but, sound dampening things that should be in your classroom based on square footage. And even that could be an equipment piece that you could request for, just to protect your hearing and make sure that you're hearing your ensembles as true as possible.
Right. An administrator understands, a violation of OSHA standards. They may not understand why you need to have acoustical panels in your room, but they can certainly understand, this environment is too loud and it's unsafe.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Which leads us to number 4, have an easy way to collect, manage, and display your data. And don't forget that it's a living document.
Well, I think that last part that you mentioned, Lisa, is so important. It really is a living document. I've been working with my district this year on another proposal, just looking ahead, 5 years out, what kind of things need to be replaced, and that's going to change over time. Um, I'm seeing a big trend in band students, where more and more students are electing to play brass instruments, as opposed to 10 years ago we saw a lot more kids choosing woodwind instruments. Well, seeing that trend change, at least in my part of the country.
Right.
um, I need more French horns, I need more tubas, I need more euphoniums. Whereas 10 years ago I was begging kids to play those instruments. Now they're flocking to those instruments.
Right.
And so my plan has to evolve over time as circumstances change.
Do you think that drum and bugle corps is to blame for that increase in brass players?
I don't know. It certainly could be. I think that, there's so many factors. I wouldn't want to speculate exactly what's causing that. But I am glad that fewer kids are wanting to play saxophone.
Oh, I'm sure you have an alto clarinet in the back you'd love to pull out at some point too, right?
Yeah, no, not so much.
Oh, that's awesome. So that brings us to number 5. Oh, actually, number 4 again was how to collect and manage and display your data. And with our webinar, I've actually come up with a multi-page Excel file that you can use. If you don't already have a resource that you're using, you just want like a plug and play kind of template, then that's going to be a resource that goes along with our webinar. And I'll have links for that in the show notes too.
And you've done such an amazing job on those materials. I think it's really going to be helpful to people as they try to dive in.
Thanks. That was really my goal. Just how can we make it so plug and play, easy for the least experienced of us to manage it easily. So thank you. So that brings us to number 5. Don't forget to collect data from your music stores. I think sometimes we forget that we don't just have to rely on ourselves or what we find on Google. We have music stores who are there to support us.
Oh, absolutely. I think, any music store is there. Any music store that really cares about their business and their clientele is there to help support the music teachers and the music programs. Yes, they're there to make money, uh, but they're also there to support those music teachers and those parents and students. And in my experience has been that my music store folks will bend over backwards to help me. So I call them when I need that kind of help. And I would encourage any teacher to do the same.
Yeah, I think if any forward looking music store, let me say that again, any forward thinking music store is going to support their school music programs, because the more successful your program is, the more kids are in it, the more of them are shopping at the music store. So it's actually a very wise business decision strategically for them to support your programs and to bend over backwards for you. So keep that in mind. Number 6. Use charts, graphs, and images.
I think those are so important because it takes a complex topic and it simplifies it. It's very easy to look at a chart and see the increase in the number of students involved in your program, or looking at a chart and seeing the age of certain instruments. In the latest document that I created, I used red, yellow, and green, with red being instruments that had exceeded their average lifespan according to the industry standards. Yellow were instruments that within 5 years would hit that lifespan limit, and green that were more than 5 years out. And I think that makes it really, really easy for an administrator to look at that information at a glance and understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, easy for us too when they walk in and say, hey, we have an extra $1,000. What do you want to spend it on? If you can quickly pull that up and pick a line that's red and go for it, then you don't have to waste that time. And unfortunately, I hear too often that they'll go somewhere else to spend that money. So
Right.
the better prepared we are, the better. And I love using images, because even a picture of your color guard or your choir while they're on the stage at state festival, or little things like that, just to continuously remind the people reading why you're important to the school, and that you aren't just talking about data and financial stuff here, but that it all comes down to what's happening in the classroom with those kids. Because I don't think administrators would be in it if they didn't have at least some kind of feeling for those kids, don't you think?
Oh, I agree. And you hit on a really important topic. We have to have that emotional connect. And when we can bring it back to children and we can bring it back to people, as opposed to making it about ourselves as the director or about the program, you're going to get a lot more mileage. Absolutely.
Yeah, which leads us to tip number 7, which is sell it emotionally and then logically. And this is actually a really popular one in business strategy and marketing strategy today, that you really want them to buy in emotionally, because then they'll use your data to justify their decision logically.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And again, your suggestion a few moments ago about having pictures of kids that are in your program as part of your document really helps to bring that emotional piece around.
Ooh, and if you can have like pictures of your pet band playing for the basketball team, if you're like my principal, he's awesome, but he's a total jock, right? So if you can show like the band playing for the football team or supporting these other things, or stroke their ego a little bit too. Here's our band that got a superior and represented our school so well.
Exactly. It's about that, it's not just about what happens within our four walls of our classroom, but music programs are there in so many ways, and they do so many things that connect us with the community at large. And I think it's important for administrators to be reminded of that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get to our last 3, I just want to review what we've done so far. So tip number 1 was think like an administrator. Tip number 2, have lots of data to justify your recommendations. Number 3 was use authoritative resources. Number 4, we talked about have an easy way to collect, manage, and display your data. Number 5, don't forget to collect information from your music store, get them to support you. Number 6, use charts, graphs, and images. And number 7, sell it emotionally and then logically, get them connected to the kids. So number 8 then is make sure you show there are many different ways to pay for it.
Yes, I think, sometimes we look at a dollar figure, or an administrator looks at a dollar figure, and again, they're trying to balance the needs of so many moving parts in a school building, or in a school district. And so if sometimes money is tight and you can find a way to, maybe meet them halfway through grants, through fundraising, through corporate sponsorships, through what have you, sometimes that's enough to get an administrator to move and come up with the rest.
Mm-hmm. And with my experience in grant writing, that is one of the major financial pieces that everyone asks for. It's who else is going to pay for this? Because nobody wants to be the only one, holding the reins. They want other people involved. Otherwise, it looks like, well, who else wants this? If nobody else wants it but me, if nobody else is going to pay for it but the school, then why should we do it? So get the parents involved and do apply for some grants and charge student fees if you have to, because it's all going to just increase your power with that administrator.
Yes. And I think philosophically, sometimes we put our foot down and we say, but the school district should provide. And that's true. The school district should provide, but that's not always a realistic viewpoint. And so often, when I talk to teachers, money comes up as being, one of the biggest challenges they deal with, and not having money coming in from the district to fulfill all of the needs of the program. And so I do think it's important for educators, music educators, to have some understanding and some knowledge of other places that they might seek out funds.
Yeah, the more the better. Really tap into everything you can, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So number 9 then is have both historical data and projected data.
Yes, I think this is really important, because an administrator needs to see what has happened in the past. So if we're asking for more instruments to meet growing enrollment, well, what is the historical trajectory of that enrollment? We started with 50 kids and now we're at 150 kids, or whatever the case may be. Having that historical data, having a repair history. We've spent, we've had this instrument for X number of years and we've spent X number of dollars repairing it. And at this point, we're spending more on repair than the instrument is worth. And that can help to justify why an instrument might need to be replaced, or a piece of equipment might need to be replaced. So having that historical data is really, really key. And then, as I mentioned before, trying to project out, so often our school budgets are spoken for, and we might need to be looking down the road so that when we do have to make big purchases, those can be planned for in advance. And so that projected data is so helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it helps them to plan for the future as well, because the money from the school and from the district does have to go into so many different programs. If you can say, look, we need, $20,000 this year, but we only need $18,000 the next year. And then we only need $10,000 the next year. And it kind of tapers off after time. If you have the ability to make that happen, that helps them pre-plan and be able to maybe even offer you more in the future as well.
Right. They can earmark those funds and plan accordingly.
Yeah. Which brings us to number 10. if you have to do a presentation, practice, practice, practice.
Well, that's always a good idea in any kind of presentation, but especially when you're presenting to your employer, your bosses, and you're asking for something. I think that you do need to practice. You need to make sure that you have laid things out in a logical manner, that you're not going to stand in front of a group and ramble or stumble over your words. So practicing is so important. And, practice in front of your friends, practice in front of your family, do it for a colleague, get input as you're practicing. What suggestions do you have? Is there any part of this that is not clear? Is there any part of this that I've overemphasized or underemphasized? And all of that will help.
Yeah, amazing how as music teachers we can, put on the performer persona so often, and yet you put us in a boardroom and having to ask for money and instruments and equipment, and all of a sudden we're not that performer anymore. And I think if we can consider that we can still mentally be in a performance and we're just performing this presentation, that might help you as well if it seems a little scary to be doing a presentation for a board.
Yeah, either that or, we get into that kind of situation and our passion takes over. And then we don't have that meaningful factual information.
Yeah, true.
And so, if you're doing a presentation in front of the board, having a PowerPoint or a keynote or a handout or something that helps to keep you on track is really, really a good idea.
So I will have a PowerPoint download template all ready to go with our webinar as well. So I will link to that in the show notes. All right, real quick, we're going to review all top 10 tips. So if you're writing them down, here we go. Number 1, think like an administrator. Number 2, have lots of data to justify your recommendations. Number 3, use authoritative resources. Number 4, have an easy way to collect, manage, and display your data. Number 5, don't forget to collect information from your music stores. Number 6, use charts, graphs, and images. Number 7, sell it emotionally, then logically. Number 8, make sure you show there are many different ways to pay for it. Number 9, have both historical and projected data. And number 10, if you have to do a presentation, practice, practice, practice. Any other tips you have, Wendy?
Well, I think that these are 10 really great places to start. And as you mentioned earlier, we have a webinar that's available that will have even more information. Every school district is different. And so I guess the last thing I would say is having an understanding of the chain of command, hierarchy, what is going to be meaningful to the district administration that you work for. Just making it personal for your own situation is kind of that last piece.
Fabulous. Well, Wendy, I can't thank you enough for partnering up with me for the webinar and for this awesome podcast interview today. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
That concludes my interview with Wendy Higdon. I do hope you were able to glean some fantastic information out of that. If you have created or are needing to create, or are thinking that at some point in the future you might have to create an instrument or equipment repair or replacement plan, I do hope you'll take us up on the webinar offer and templates. It's totally free, and we really feel like we're making it as easy as possible to make it happen for you. We know how busy you are. We are too. That's why we did it. Again, the link is in the show notes to register. And don't forget to get on over to smartmusic.com and get your smart music on. And remember to share this podcast with your music teaching friends, subscribe, and leave a review. Until next time, keep teaching on.